Morning, everybody. So I thought I would sort of try and change what I was initially going to talk about to give you a bit of insight into how do we at CRS think about sort of refreshing our strategy with a more of a resilience lens. One of the things that I think has been great about this conference is that we can really start to talk about lots of people who are grappling with what is resilience, how do we measure it, how do we implement it. So I thought I would just talk a little bit about how we're doing it and see how that resonates with what you're doing. Because I think that one of the great values of this kind of meeting is that we are all thought leaders in our own communities. And it's sort of that process of how ideas, spread and get pushed through different systems so that we can start to build more effective institutions through time. So just to think about CRS, we work through partners. We have about 1,100 partners around the world that we work through. Resilience is probably a new thing for many of those people, or it's a term that they need to adapt activities to. And if you can think about, over the last 10 to 15 years, there have been many new initiatives that have gone through the sort of the NGO world, and this is a new kind of refresh process. So how do you actually do that? I think leadership is quite important. Having sort of a process where decisions are made and information is shared rapidly and strategically through an organization is very helpful in realigning people to thinking and doing things in new ways. Clearly having the right kind of skill set in the organization is important. And when you start to move into new areas, you do have to bring in people with new talents, and you have to provide training to people in rethinking things or integrating things in different ways. And I think part of that really is, how do you as an institution and, working with other partners, how are you agile to these changes? What is the process that you use for doing this? One of the things that we use is something called a business model canvas. There's quite a lot of literature about this particular process. You can look it up on Google. It's called the business model generation. We use that planning tool as a way of trying to integrate new ideas into our thinking. And one of the things that process has done is it's really helped people to refocus on who the clients are and what is the business model that we're using as an international NGO in the way that we approach the different types of clients that we work with. And we identified 5 clients as the people that we are engaging with. So those clients, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, the 5 key clients that we work with are farmer organizations, partners, donors, local governments, and local entrepreneurs. And we almost have different value, we have different value propositions to be able to work with those different types of clients. Just going through the process of understanding, what is your client, what are the demands from your clients, helps you to start to see what partnerships you need, what resources and assets you need in order to be able to provide an effective service. Now, when you complicate that process with resilience, you start to have to realign partnerships, and you see that you need different types of assets and skills in order to, change the way that you're thinking, change the way that you're doing something. So that process needs a lot of communication. So I've just given you one of these. This is a kind of, I'm sort of opening up the hood of how we're operating in this space. So on your seat, you'll probably see one of these. And this is one of our first communication pieces that we're using internally and through our partnerships, just to give them an idea of what does it mean to be thinking through this process of resilience programming. What are the elements of that, and what are the sort of new emphases that we're placing in order to be able to do that more effectively? So this, comes back to this question of the session. How do you make institutions more effective at providing resilience programming? So this is, that's kind of the process that we're using, if you like. So how is resilience changing our thinking then? I think one of the things that resilience has really allowed us to do is to step back a little bit and say we need to pay much more attention in terms of our planning of projects and our co-designing with the clients that we're working with. So, that's something that we've been doing for a long time, of course, but this allows us to sort of pay much more attention to that and start to build back in feedback loops with those key partners as we start the process of project design. And I think for those of you who went to the donor group meeting, they're also changing the way or looking at new ways of providing funding to NGOs and other partners so that it gives them more space to do that co-planning. And I think, again, why are we doing that? Really what we're trying to get at is this idea of how can we build relationships with people so that it's not just co-planning, but it's really co-investing in solutions. And I think that is a really important part of the resilience process. And I think that, again, that helps us to think about what we're doing. Now, when it comes to actual capacity building, another thing that we're really looking into is how do you provide consistent training or capacity building to the people who are doing the different types of work that needs to be done. And we work in 50 plus countries in the agricultural team. So just for our group, we have a lot of different people, a lot of different cultures, languages that we have to provide training in. And what we're trying to build is like a core curriculum that allows people to have a consistent process of the types of training that we're developing. And I think that that kind of process is not just of interest to agencies like ourselves, but as we start to work much more closely with extension services, and I think again this is this change in the roles of NGOs over time, whereas in the past we used to have a much more localized view of capacity building and strengthening, now with this idea of building in relationships with private sector, relationships with extension, local government, local CBOs and farmer organizations, we need to be able to provide systems that they can also use with their clients as well. So we're pushing or developing a capacity building program that others can use to train their local networks. And I think that's a different process, and we're using a lot of technology, in fact, to do that. And technology is a kind of a helpful process, but on its own, it's not enough. So you've always got to build technology products, training products I'm talking about, in ways that we use sort of blended training. So we're using e-courses, and we spent quite a lot of time developing a set of e-courses around what we think is a core curriculum, and that is used in a blended approach with people on the ground who are talking about real situations and testing practical ideas with real farmer organizations and real farmers. So that process provides us with greater consistency in our training processing, in our messaging, and I think that it also comes back to the measurement group. What they were saying is that the more standardization you can have in those processes, or the more consistency you can have, it's much easier to measure how well things are going. If you can measure things quickly and learn from those things, you can then use that to update and upgrade the approaches that you're using. So it's that ability to provide consistency at scale and then measure it and sort of prototype, fail, and improve and upgrade that I think is going to really help us provide a much more consistent capacity building process. So key things then: getting the strategy right and the change management process right, being very clearly client focused and spending real time to make sure that works, using technology in clever ways so that you can get to people at much lower cost, and having much more consistent and better analysis with other agencies who can provide that. That's not us doing that. We're working with other learning centers to do that. And just as a final thought, always watching what other people are doing. I think being vigilant really helps you to become agile. And what I see at the moment is that you've got a lot of sort of new business approaches, which are more private sector companies that are coming in to provide very low-cost solutions in health services, in education, and in other areas where, again, they're using a lot of technology to provide scaled solutions at a very affordable price for highly vulnerable communities. And those people, I think, are the people to really watch, because they are doing things in very different ways. They're doing it for a fee, and they are scaling very quickly. And I think we could learn a lot from those people as well. So, thank you.